Welcome to Polaris-Live, conversations on the U.S.-China relationship and its global impact as seen through the eyes of experts from around the world. This user-supported channel is brought to you live in conjunction with the Foreign Policy Association of New York. Viewers may ask questions using the bar on the right-hand side of your screen. The upcoming United States presidential elections are being called the most important signal for the future direction of U.S. domestic and foreign policy in generations. Throughout this autumn, we will invite a select group of international experts to offer their views on the American elections and how countries around the world, especially China, are preparing for their outcome. This is your host, Sarwar Kashmiri, and my guest today is Professor Zha Daojiong from Peking University in Beijing, China. Zha Daojiong, Professor of International Political Economy in the School of International Studies and the Institute of South-South Cooperation and Development, Peking University. His areas of expertise include non-traditional security studies, international political economy, and China's international economic relations. He's widely published in the international media. Before joining the faculty of Peking University, he taught in the University of Macau, International University of Japan, Miyazaki International College, and Renmin University of China. Welcome back to Polaris-Live, Dr. Zha Daojiong.
You're most welcome, Sawar. I'm happy to be here.
Just yesterday, China and India announced an agreement on military patrols on their bitterly contested border in the Himalaya Mountains, where both countries have fought fierce battles with each other. Is this a big deal in relations between the two giants?
It's a big deal in Western media, but for the societies of India and China, the average people, it's just one of those many dimensions. The two countries are neighbors. The two societies have thousands of years of interaction.
But
border confrontation over the past several years was unfortunate.
Yes. But still, it was a little bit unexpected, and I'm asking because this deal comes just days before the BRICS, the grouping of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa meeting in Kazan, Russia, that will be chaired by President Putin. And doubly important from my perspective is while the U.S. is wooing India as a counter to China's influence in Asia Pacific, and trade between the two, including military items, continues to grow. India has become the largest buyer of Russian oil, does not support American-led sanctions on Russia. How do you help us make some sense out of these points that I've just made?
Well, like I said, when you watch from afar, or you sort of take a gaze from above, sort of satellite type of observation, you can easily draw those connections. But I don't have insights how and why the Chinese and Indian militaries reached the agreement, made a decision to announce. Probably there is an element of projecting that the two can go get along. And, in other words, returning some level of tranquility to the border in the mutual interests.
Right.
To what extent it's related to what you said about the BRICS summit in Kazan, I really don't. I think it's a matter for analysis. After all, with or without such summits, the two societies have to find a way to live with each other. We're neighbors.
Yes, it's the issue here that I think a lot of us sitting in America who watch all this are trying to figure out is that there seem to be so many different strands that are weaving into each other. I mean, if India is trying to I'm sorry if America is trying to do India to be a counter in some ways to China in the Indo-Pacific. But India, on the other hand, is not completely in the side of, so for example, supporting American policy, Western policy in Ukraine. Is this just part of the evidence of so-called change in the global rules-based order that has existed since 1947, that countries are going to have to deal with each other more with national interest as opposed to ideology?
Well, if I were in America or had a opportunity to speak with some of the strategic thinkers that eventually make national policies for America, I would respond to what you're sort of questioning by asking myself, so what? Does any of these developments actually shake America? In what way? How does this relate to the bread and butter issues of Americans every day? You mentioned the Indo-Pacific. The way of framing is an art in terms of convincing oneself about the purpose of life, about how to manage relationships with people and governments that are beyond the oceans. The Indo-Pacific originally was crafted in the 1930s by marine biologists who traced the migration of fish and also microorganisms that basically was saying we are connected between the Indian Ocean and some of the fish, the species would migrate to the Pacific. And today, for some strange reason, I don't think it's very justifiable in terms of a government or a governing elite taking responsibility and thinking about the true welfare of their own people to somehow elevate this particular word to a geostrategic imagination.
That's interesting. I did not know that this phrase Indo-Pacific had actually started so long ago. I thought this was a recent.
Yes, and what the point I was trying to. No, the point I was trying to finish is that too many times we look at international affairs, we're parachuting ourselves into the air, disregarding that you have humans, you have species, you have the real Earth down there, and as my professors would remind us as students of international politics, it's always a bad idea to tuck a pencil into your mouth and start to redraw the map of the world.
Well, you see how much conversations like this are very helpful to analyze what some people believe are just new developments. I mean, I was there at the beginning of that Shangri-La meeting 3 years ago, almost 6 years ago now, where all of a sudden the American lexicon included the Indo-Pacific, and the idea was that we need to broaden the scope. So thank you for putting a wider frame around this. It's very helpful, which leads me, Professor, to the next question, which is again from this morning. The South China Morning Post is headlining a question: will BRICS summit push for end of US dollar dominance? Is this perennial dreaming, wishful thinking? I mean, the dollar is the currency of the world, the trade currency of the world, and it's based on, the wide, deep bond markets on Wall Street and the so-called rule of law. What do you think about this? Is this something that you believe is would be good to have for everybody? Do you think it can ever happen? What are your thoughts?
Well, before the dollar became so influential, so broadly used in world trade, you had the British pound. You also, before British pound, paper currency, you had gold, you had silver, you had other materials that function as a world currency. So we need a world currency. If it's not the dollar, it's something else. And now your question is whether or not BRICS is working to quote unquote unseat the dollar. Number one, I don't think that is a, let's say, life or death issue on the agenda. Number two, many of the BRICS participants in the process, they probably sense it's okay, or the time has come for them to think about another basket rather than just the US dollar to put their eggs in. And you don't need me to repeat, right? The US government, especially in the more recent years, has more frequently weaponized the use of dollar. And put yourself on the other end, if another government, or go back to its history, but Britain, or the British pound was the dominant currency. And number three, would it be wise for BRICS to engineer just out of a new method of payment, just out of fear, or just out of protest, or whatever? Thinking, I don't think it was wise. I don't think it's workable, because the dollar is a reality, and so many dollars are deposited in banks, and so many dollars are in the hands of consumers around the world. At the end of the day, it's the end users of the dollar, of any other currency that has global influence, or influence beyond these borders, it's those end users that makes the difference, rather than these kind of meetings or advocacy by some scholars or writers that capture attention.
You're an international economist. You have wide experience in dealing with relationships around trade. And in America recently, the phrase China's overcapacity is increasingly in the headlines. And for instance, China's production capacity already doubled the global demand, is expected to grow by another 50% in 2025. Now, the editorials here say this doesn't appear to be good industrial policy for China or indeed the world, because it looks that there's dumping of this overcapacity below cost. I mean, do you believe this? Why does China continue to follow this path if it is true what we're reading?
There are, at least we can spend hours and hours debating that. Overcapacity as a descriptive matter is normal, unless you are saying every nation ought to, can afford to, and must work just to produce for its own domestic consumption. In other words, no trade. Then, overcapacity would not be an issue. Because you need overcapacity to have trade. Are you saying, if you were a factory person, are you really saying you're only producing for your workers, for your family, and you don't want to make a sale? So in a domestic case. So let's really be less emotive about that, even the way China is being talked about. Now, secondly, actually, from where I sit as a scholar, reminder, the talk of overcapacity or some policies taken using that term, that notion as justification, is a good reminder to us, to ourselves. Behind that policy is subsidies. Why? We have space for rethinking subsidies, because subsidies is actually benefiting the end consumers in terms of when it goes to export. Why should we subsidizing the costs of consumption overseas. Right? And if, in other words, I don't really think this has to be an issue of agony or the issue that arises to some level of emotive feeling. Some of the products, for example, electronic vehicles, the European Union said it conducted a survey here in China, the Chinese industries make similar conditions on you. Those things, kind of findings, capture attention, but you must bear in mind those findings are unitary. I'm sorry, unilateral actions. There's a loop there, but then the word, unless you're really saying the no trade word is the perfect word,
Right.
or no trade is your end pursuit, then you live with overcapacity, but at the same time you work on the complaints. What goes behind the complaint? Is it really in your interest?
But you know, I'm interrupting you, but the connection that is made here in the American media anyway is that all of this is tied to China's depressed economy, that its own sales of things that are made are not really taking off in China like they used to, and therefore all of this capacity is producing so much that China has to sell it below cost to keep its economy floating. That seems to be the context of this, and also to dominate new industries which are coming up as green automobiles and so on. But I think your point is well made that overcapacity is always there in economies, or there wouldn't be any trade. Everything would be consumed internally.
Well, I don't know. It depends on what direction such conversations are designed to go. Before China or the Chinese market became a source of major export of EVs or vehicles, we had foreign brands running in China, virtually from every major producer.
Yes.
And there was no meaningful Chinese brand with diesel engine cars. Would that not result of overcapacity in other societies? But did we benefit from having those vehicles? If we couldn't make it ourselves, should we go back to oxen-led carts? So it's really what a product can serve, what purpose you have in a society. Now, when you start to go in the direction of trying to ascertain intention, dominance, yeah, maybe. Nobody can deny it. I mean, people have desires. But every technology is conditional. Every technology is fit for purpose for a particular time. Even with the lithium battery technologies, many people say it wouldn't take a couple more years for solid batteries, for hydrogen-based batteries. And frankly speaking, because of many of the limitations of the electric vehicle, it's just part of the ecosystem. For long-distance driving, it will have to be diesel. The diesel engine cars and buses have been here for over 200 years. There is a good reason for that. And EVs may be for inner city transport. That's about it. But then I would think a more sensible issue in terms of discussion is whether or not, for the purpose of improving public welfare in the city, inner city buses for public transport, government policies should be geared toward uh, adopting EVs for intercity public transport, because the benefits is immediate. It's for the general public. It helps clean up the air, reduce the emissions, and that is true, especially true in low-income countries, whereby the health burdens and the suffering from air pollutants is so bad. So it depends on the end goal, rather than being saying this is a China thing, or that's a U.S. thing, or that's an ally.
Okay, that's fair. Let me take a moment to remind our viewers that Polaris-Live is entirely viewer-supported. We'd appreciate your signing up to our mailing list at kashmiri.com and the YouTube channel www.polaris-live.com. There's no cost, and it really does help us. I'm coming now to the upcoming American elections, Professor Zha Daojiong. You know, in America, we all are fixated on the presidential election. It seems to be a crossroads in many people's mind. Are ordinary Chinese people also reacting the same way, that they're fixated with the choice of the two candidates and the elections, or do most people go along their daily business and not worry about it?
Well, there is a difference between interest and worry, mainly because, the political systems or the leadership formation process here in China and over there in your country are different. The election cycles in the U.S. do not ordinarily generate much interest here in China. Yes, ordinary people don't know how to associate with that. They wouldn't experience the same in their home country. Now, for the elites, people who watch policy, study policy for a living, yes, they have interest. And among my circle of friends, colleagues who study international affairs or bilateral ties between China and the U.S., watch with interest, and we have a quiet glee in some way that this time around, for this election cycle, China-related affairs are not that prominently highlighted in the presidential debates or these campaigns by either candidate.
I missed the last part of it. There was this noise behind. You said in this election, you made it sound as though it's a little bit different what elites are thinking. I missed that part of it.
Okay, in this particular presidential election cycle, those of us who study international affairs, who study bilateral relations, have a quiet glee in that China is not a prominent feature on the ticket. And occasionally you would have one candidate responding to another,
right,
which has a China connection. This is maybe we're fortunate, once that China becomes the headline issue in these election cycles.
Yes.
Then the campaigners and their support staff will have to come up with sharp positions. So on that basis, probably there will be room for how should I frame it? For not necessarily an entirely new beginning, but for negotiations or for resuming contacts afterwards, because negotiations did not deliver a sharp result in China.
So let me now come to this point that I wanted to ask you. You're one of the most experienced observers of relations between China and other countries, but especially the United States. Your words have a very important significance, I believe. What I want to ask you is that if you had a few moments alone to speak to President Xi Jinping and then whoever will be the next president of the United States, and give them 2 or 3 specific actions that they can take to improve the relationship between the two countries, what might you tell them?
Well, I probably will give them a short list of 4. Number 1, the international order, or the notion of order, is just very natural, domestically applicable, internationally applicable. But because it's international, it requires give and take. It requires a constant. That means it's good devotion not to give it up just because you have differences. Work it out. So that has to. That's leadership in any context. And the second is that, look, China and the United States, or you can put the United States first and China second. These are societies that have tremendously benefited from open each other. The road back on both sides, some of that began before COVID, is not really in the interest of either society. There is serious space for rethinking, and beginning with, for example, encouraging airlines to reestablish or direct flights into society. And thirdly, yes, today technology is different. Today we have artificial intelligence. But the whole notion of national ownership, of that matter, sovereign exclusivity when it comes to certain technologies, that's space for thinking. Technology is not a final thing. It's any technology is transitional. We need each other's markets. It's very much like, let me simplify it this way. A doctor's expertise is based on having access to patients. The patient may not be that well versed in medical science, but without the patient, the doctor, we don't have a doctor either. So I do understand in the U.S. context, interdependence is no longer the last point is that both China and the United States are quite good at regulating foreign activities. I'm talking about business activities in their own societies. And it's unfortunate, it's really not in either to have the current trend, especially sped up in the past several years, the reduction of local investment. Chinese investments in the U.S. creates jobs for the U.S., pays tax in the U.S. American investments in China creates jobs in China and increases tax for China. I'm not saying there are no limits, there are no fences, there are, but the current effort, the mainstream effort or the prevailing effort of making the fences higher, making it more difficult for companies from the other side. It's totally otherwise.
And so you would actually give the same suggestions to both sides,
right,
that you would do. Okay.
And foreign policy situation, the diplomatic situation in the process, it takes both sides.
Well, Dr. Zha, we've Allah's run out of time, so I must end it here, but I know we'll try and get you back again before too long. I want to thank you so very much for that timely and instructive conversation. And I want to thank our viewers from around the world, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope I sometimes watch this and join you and look at your viewers' comments as well.
Thank you. And please join us, the rest of our viewers from around the world. Please join us again on Polaris-Live.com as we continue to explore the impact of the U.S. presidential election on the most consequential relationship in the world, that between the United States and China, and its impact in the world. Until then, goodbye.